Hello, this talk is about how to work towards getting promoted as a clinician educator at academic medical schools. It is put together by myself and Dr. Chertoff, my chair of radiology at Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center, from our experience both as chairs of the Departmental Promotions Committee, but more particularly from being on the Academic Promotions and Tenure Committee at Geisel Medical School at Dartmouth. Although some of the things I'm going to talk about are specific to Geisel, the vast majority of them are not. However, the criteria for promotion of the different tracks does vary from institution to institution. You really should check the guidelines at your particular institution. Finally, although I am a radiologist, the areas I'm going to be talking about are not specific to radiology by any means and pretty much apply to any area of clinical medicine. So my learning objectives are for you to be able to identify the benefits of applying for promotion, list the potential promotional tracks at Geisel for a clinician, compare and plan scholarly activities that may contribute towards portfolio development, be able to recognize some of the opportunities for engagement that exist, and then finally understand the pathway for promotion application. And this obviously is fairly specific to Geisel. So first of all, you're an assistant professor. You've been perhaps in practice at your institution for several years, and why might you want to get promoted? Well, first, but by no means least important, is the sense of achievement. We all work incredibly hard in our academic careers, and this is a recognition that we have achieved a certain stature, that the work that we've done is recognized by others. It also gives you some increased recognition on the national front if you're involved with any of our many national societies. Many of the ones in radiology are shown here. There is also an expectation that when you go into academic medicine, go into academic radiology, I'm talking about specifically here, that you will apply for promotion after a certain amount of time. You know, obviously your expectations perhaps in day one of the job, vary a little bit, day 3,000 in the job, but your department expects you to work towards this, as does your institution. There may be more funding opportunities if you are a researcher. If you are an associate or a full professor rather than assistant professor, there are some granting bodies that you do have to be one of these higher ranks before you can apply to them. While we all hope that you will stay at our institution for the rest of your careers, we're also realists. People do move jobs, and if you are a higher academic rank at the time that you are applying for that job, you are likely to come in at that rank, sometimes at higher rank, but not often, but very rarely at a lower rank. That may mean that you come in at a higher pay scale. It may mean that you come in with more benefits. And talking of money, at Geisel, you do not get paid any extra if you're an associate or full professor, and if you're assistant, because we are employed by the hospital, not the medical school, and applications are medical school. However, at other institutions, there is an increase in pay with increasing academic rank. At some institutions, you may have additional benefits to being a high academic rank, such as more CME time, less call, and so on. It is unusual for clinician educator or similar pathways to be tenured, but they are tenured in some institutions, even for MDs. And that would mean a certain amount of job security over not being tenured. At our institution, as we are all employees of the hospital, generally speaking, rather than the few which are employed by the medical school, there is no tenure for hospital-employed MDs. At some institutions, but not my own, there may be an up or out policy that you are expected to apply and eventually receive promotion after a certain period of time, which is usually made fairly specific in your contract, and if you fail to achieve it, your contract may be terminated. At other institutions, if you do not apply for academic promotion after a certain amount of time, you may have your track changed. So you may go on to a more clinically based track. Many institutions, including my own, have a clinically prefixed track, and you may be changed into one of those. Whether this matters or not to you is a personal matter. And of course, it's always nice to be able to change your cards, although it took my institution 3 goes before we got it right. So why not consider being put forward for promotion? Well, I have to be fair. To be able to get to the point where your portfolio is in a place where you will be recommended for promotion takes a lot of work. You have to do the graph to kind of get there. You have to write the papers, give the lectures, do the trips, be on the committees, and that does require an investment of time. Not all of that time is likely to be accommodated during your working hours. A lot of it's likely to be weekends and evenings. I'm not saying this isn't worthwhile time and worthwhile work, but I don't want to say to you that it isn't any work. The process of putting forward your portfolio, or your department putting forward your portfolio, to be more accurate, for promotion is a certain amount of work. You've got to get your CV in the right order. We have to get letters from outside reviewers. You have to write my institution a personal statement, and this takes some time. You've got to collate evaluations and so on. A certain amount of time, either by you or administrative assistants. So perhaps you're at the state where you say, why bother? This is not something that's important to you, at least not at the current time, and you're not going to think about this. Well, this is all part of your long career strategy, and you have to look ahead, and you might not be thinking now that you want to consider promotion if your institution where that's not required. But you may down the line. So people's goals change. They change from private practice to academia. They change from academia to private practice. But if you put yourself in a position where you're going to be able to achieve your goals, even if they change, that's going to be advantageous to you. Most medical schools will have a fairly extensive document which details the criteria for being at rank and then being promoted to the different ranks of assistant, associate, and full professor, and so on, and the different tracks that are available at your institution. For Geisel people, ours is available at the link below. In my experience, some of these documents give you more guidance than others. Ours does give you a lot of guidance, but it's 119 pages, so I say no more. So let us just look at the tracks that we have at Geisel Medical School. Well, for the academic medical system, the AMS line, which the vast majority of the radiologists in my department and the majority of the clinicians in the hospital will be applying to, there are 3 potential tracks. There is the clinician educator, which again the vast majority go through, the clinician investigator, and those are for the MDs who are doing a very high proportion of their time in research, and then for the non-MDs, investigator educator is an option. There are multiple other tracks that are available for the non-physicians who are elsewhere within Geisel Medical School, but those are not commonly used by the physicians within the academic medical system, and so I'm going to continue to discuss the clinician educator tract in particular. However, much of what I'm going to say does apply to the other tracks. For other institutions, the vast majority in my experience from a survey that we recently did, they have some form of a clinician tract or clinician educator tract. It's called different things. So check the tracks at your local institution. Within the AMS lines, there are instructor, assistant professor, associate professor, and professor for all of those ranks. But for the AMS line at Geisel, they're all non-tenured. And the instructors are non-voting. The others are voting members of Geisel. As I mentioned before, we also have these clinical-prefixed-ranks. I'll talk a little bit more later. So the same ranks, but clinically prefixed, and all of these are non-tenured and all of these are non-voting. One of the things that's important to notice is that for academic promotion, time at rank is not enough. You don't get to the end of 5 or 6 years and then you're just kind of there. You have to be able to document scholarly activity, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about what scholarly activity is. And for us, this is a Geisel appointment, not Dartmouth Hitchcock. So it's the medical school that decides if you be promoted, not the hospital. Scholarly activity is divided by most medical schools into these 4 different areas: teaching, investigational research, patient care, and engagement or service. It's called different things in different places. These are not completely separate areas of activity. They overlap significantly, as I've shown here. So, for example, you may be doing clinical research, or you may be doing educational research, or you may be doing engagement in an educational area. Geisel defines scholarly activity, and I think this is pretty consistent from all the outside criteria that I've seen from different medical schools. It's the creation and the dissemination of new knowledge. So to reiterate, what you're doing should be new, should be created by you, it should be disseminated to others, and its end goal is to further medical knowledge. As your scholarly activity gets disseminated outside of your institution into the region or nationally or internationally, it has a greater impact on your total portfolio when you go forth to promotion. Generally speaking, most people spend 5 to 6 years as a minimum at their rank before promotion. At Geisel, assistant professors have 3-year renewals of their stata, and associate professors have 6-year renewals. And they have to document academic activities in order to be able to stay at rank. So if you're an assistant professor and you're doing no academic activity whatsoever, you might potentially be changed to a clinically prefixed rank. Let's look at first for promotion to associate professor in the clinician educator track. So you have to demonstrate excellence in teaching any level learners, so that might be medical students or even undergraduate students, through perhaps CME activities where you're educating your colleagues. There used to be a significant emphasis on medical student education, but that has really evened out to any level learners now. You have to show local or extramural engagement, evidence of scholarship, and have regional recognition with a burgeoning, an early national recognition. When we move on to promotion to full professor on the clinician educator track pathway, again, you have to have teaching any level learners, engagement, local and extramural, clinical care, and scholarship. But now you need to have national recognition and a burgeoning international reputation. I want you to think of your portfolio, and your portfolio is kind of your CV on steroids, if you like, as a bonsai tree. It takes time to mature. You can't kind of do nothing for 5 years and then say, wow, I'd really like to be associate professor. I've been here for 5 years. Now what do I need to do? It's really difficult to kind of like cram that all in a year or 2 years. You need to start pretty much as soon as you come out of residency and fellowship, or even before, and how you're going to build your portfolio of scholarly activities. Having said that, however, you can certainly catch up. It's going to take you longer, but it's not that you can't catch up if you've done nothing for the last 5 years, scholarly-wise, and this happens not infrequently to people. For example, they may be part-time, they may be looking after children, and then several years down the line, kids are older, and they suddenly get a real interest in becoming more academic, doing more research, and so on, and you can certainly catch up. It's just going to take you longer. So let's come back to this key question of what is scholarly product. I'm going to talk about all 4 areas, but I'm going to start first with research or investigation. So your research can be individual or it can be team-based, but just being what's called a cog in a wheel is not sufficient. In other words, you have to show that you have contributed to this research in some way, other than perhaps just churning out some basic data analysis. And you need to be recognized that you are a contributor to this research, either by regional, national, international standards. The research can be lab-based, it can be clinical, it can be education, it can be population-based, and so on. What I've tried to give some idea with this slide and many of my other slides is sort of, what is the impact factor on your promotional portfolio of these different areas. So for grants, extramural grants have more impact than internal grants. Governmental more than industrial, societal. The total funding is only really comes into play if you are the PI or the co-PI, because it is a recognition of your stature and national standing that you attracted this funding. And then investigator level, it's better to be a principal, greater than a co-principal, better than a co-investigator. Now, that's not to say that these lower levels of engagement are not important, that they're not significant. They certainly are. I don't think that just because you haven't got a RO1 that's not going to count towards your portfolio. The standards for a clinician educator in terms of research and grants are significantly less than they are for somebody on an investigator pathway. But I want to give you kind of an idea of the impact factor. Research innovation, as in patents, innovations, and other sorts of entrepreneurial activities, certainly count. And obviously publications is what we think of. Now, again, I've tried to give you some idea of the impact of your different activities here. It's better to write a peer-reviewed paper than a non-peer-reviewed paper. It's better to write a paper than an abstract or an exhibit. It's certainly better to do original research than editorials, reviews. Books are kind of ranked down from peer-reviewed papers, which is kind of interesting to me because they take an awful lot more work than many peer-reviewed papers, but that's the way it is, and writing a book is better than a chapter. The journal quality is considered, measured either by the impact or the H factor I'll talk about in a minute. And journals at both paper and online are considered. There are very good online journals and there are not so good paper journals, and these kind of things where you did publish are taken into account by the committee at the time of evaluation of a portfolio. In a survey we did of promotion criteria around the country, very few, I think it was only a couple, actually mentioned a figure for how many publications you need to get up to associate or full professor. At Geisel, certainly there is absolutely no set number for promotion, and people look at your total package here. It's better to be a first author, and then particularly as you're aiming towards professorial promotion, a senior author. Being sixth author on 4 papers is probably not going to count for a whole lot. However, team science is recognized in many disciplines where there may be sometimes 50 authors on a paper, and that is acknowledged and understood by these committees. At that point, they're going to really look to see if your contribution to that work is recognized. So as regards publications, the quality and the quantity really counts here. And there is something that is called the Goldilocks analogy. And that's that if you have too few papers, even if they're really high impact, and this is particularly for people who are going on investigator pathways, they may consider this as marginal productivity. On the other hand, if you have very large numbers of papers of very questionable significance, and for clinician educator, perhaps this might be somebody who's going up for associate professor and has 20 papers, but every single one's a case report. There is also this thing called salami science, where you publish a little bit of your the results of your research in one paper, and you break it out, and you do another one, another, and so on. So you need to have some sort of a balance here. I just want to briefly mention the H-index, as this is certainly used by some promotions committees. So the H-index is an author-level metric, and it includes a combination of both productivity in terms of your number of papers and the citation impact. So the theory being that, if you write a really good paper, a lot of people are going to cite it. You can find your H-index very easily by going to Google Scholar. You put in your name, it will ask you a whole bunch of things. Is this your paper? Is that your paper? You say which one it is, and it comes out with a number. Web of Science also does something similar. What the threshold of an H-index, which is considered good, will depend on what track you're going on. It's obviously much higher for somebody who's going on a research or investigator type track, as well as the rank that you're going for being higher for full professor and associate. I did mine just out of interest, ended up being 13, which I gather for a clinician educator professor in radiology is about average. Let's move away from research and into education. So all types of education are considered important. Teaching formal courses, either undergraduate through PhD or GME levels. Bedside teaching, or as we would call it in radiology, packside teaching, is definitely considered, and you need to document those hours that you spend with a resident by your side. Being an invited speaker, it's better to be a visiting professor than it is to be invited on a CME course or a societal course, but all count. But this is the important thing. You need to document this. You need to document what you taught, who you taught it to, how much. Was this did you spend 600 hours with your residents sitting with you last year, for example? Was this a 90-minute workshop, or was this a didactic lecture? And you need to collate the evaluations you got, and that is your job. I just want to mention here on the side that when you get sent your evaluations for the residency program or the student lecture you gave or from the CME course, it is your job to collate those and keep them somewhere safe for future promotion. You may move to another institution, for example, and you're going to need these. It is not the job of the person who sent them to you. I speak from bitter experience here. Development of a curriculum is considered extremely important. The wider that curriculum is disseminated, the more important it is. So if you develop a national curriculum or part of a team developing a national curriculum, that is significant, more so than institutional, which is more so than a departmental curriculum. But you do need to document that it was actually used, that X number of institutions have adopted this curriculum and so on. You can develop educational materials as part of your scholarly activity. So these may be publications, books, chapters, guidelines, and so on. Or they can be in the form of digital media, modules, videos, virtual patients, web pages, and blogs, etc. Or perhaps assessment criteria. So perhaps you are part of a group of either one of your national societies or NBME, for example, that is developing exam bank questions. What is very important for these educational materials is that if they are peer-reviewed, they have more kudos than if they're not peer-reviewed, and you really need to show use. I think our promotions criteria is probably somewhat ahead of the game here, that we really do recognize non-traditional publications such as digital media, and others are coming to that point. Not all of them are quite there, but you can show use in different ways. You can show how many people downloaded your resources, so they accessed your pages, that institutions adopted something that you've made, that perhaps it might be the number of exams that have been deployed as if you were developing exam material, and so on. On most CVs for promotion, there is a slot for mentorship. This is not every single resident you ever taught, but is those that you've had true mentoring relationships with. And the more you can show a positive outcome from this, perhaps it was a student who went into your career field, that they did some kind of a research with you, and so on, it's really helpful. As I said before, it's important to collate your evaluations. And this includes both quantitative evaluations and qualitative in terms of the comments. Keep these. You might not need all of them if you're 10 years down the line. We're probably not going to be really interested about what a medical student said to you in 2001. They may only be interested in the ones from the last couple of years, but if you keep them, you have them there. I'm moving on now to the clinical arena of scholarly activity. It's important to note this is not about RVUs. This is nothing to do with how productive you are as a clinician. That's for the hospital or the clinic to worry about. That is not anything to do with your medical school promotion. However, there are clinical criteria which are very important to the medical schools. For example, you may have developed an institutional program, a clinical program. Perhaps you've started some new surgical technique or some new imaging technique which has been adopted. The more you have evidence of regional engagement or reputation, the better this is. So perhaps you've developed a regional program, you've developed regional protocols, that you can show that you get referrals from a wide catchment area, or even better, that you have a national reputation. So you're being invited to speak on a clinical area within your area of specialty, that you're a member of national organizations within your specialty, or perhaps even better, you've been invited to be part of a governmental committee. The final of the 4 areas I talked about with scholarly activity is engagement or service. And this is the one that's a little bit more difficult to get your hands around. Engagement can be in any of the 3 areas I talked about before. So engagement can be part of research, it can be part of teaching, and it can be part of your clinical activities. Similar to some of the things I've talked about before, national engagement is better than regional and institution. Even being a member of the National Society is a kind of low level of engagement, although we can all pay $500 and belong to an organization. Being part of a committee, again, national greater than regional, better than institutional, departmental. It's better to be a chair than an officer or a member. But you do really need to be able to describe the product of these committees. So, for example, you need to say that you're a member of this national committee, perhaps part of one of your subspecialty organizations, and this committee was tasked with developing this, that you did it, it was disseminated, so on, and particularly if you can say your particular role within that committee. Here's some examples of research engagement. You could be part of a study section or a panel, a grant review or journal editor. Talking about journal reviews specifically, being part of an editorial board is definitely recognized as being significant. If you're a journal reviewer, it's better to be a standing one than an ad hoc one. And, in terms of number of reviews, some places ask for a number of reviews, some don't. There's doing 1 review a year is probably not very much, but doing 100 is probably doing too many, and you should be writing those papers rather than reviewing 100 papers. What about educational engagement? Well, there are certainly a large number of education-related committees, both locally and nationally. You can also be part of educational administration within your department by being an education director or residency director or associate director, for example. You can be chair of a program at a societal meeting, or you can be a national examiner or an examined developer for residency or students. You can also be engaged with administration on multiple levels, from national to departmental. And certainly in radiology, we have a very large number of national organizations. There's actually something like 40 to 50 in all that we can be engaged with. I want to just give you a couple of examples here of institutional engagement examples. You can be part of a search committee. You can be a program director, associate assistant. This obviously crosses over a lot with education. You could be a medical director or section director or vice chair within your department. And these all count. So how do you become involved either locally, regionally, or nationally? Well, you really have to put yourself forward. You may be lucky, you may have some great mentors in your department, and they come out and try and get you really engaged in something, involved in something they're involved in. But you kind of have to look out for yourself here. So there are many opportunities to look out for people. Ask in the department who is involved with the organization that you are. You can look on the websites of your national organizations, find the committee chairs, drop them a line, go up to them at your national meetings, say, I would love to be involved with AMSA or ASA or whatever your organization is. How can I be involved? And then do it. Now, just having your name on a committee is not necessarily going to be enough. You're expected to produce, and it's usually recognized fairly quickly, people who are involved at that level. And they tend to be moved forward fairly fast. Networking is key. Whatever national organizations you are involved with, networking, here this is some, my chair is networking very heavily at the AUR cocktail party, as you can see, is going to really help you. I can't tell you how many opportunities have opened up to me by just chatting to somebody at the AUR cocktail party or the RSNA or something going on. So network and make use of it. Really use your contacts. So you can use your contacts to get some offer your services as visiting professor. If you're a good speaker, then that tends to proliferate when you've done a couple. You can let people know that you're really interested in speaking on meeting programs or CME talks. You can get involved by being a moderator or a speaker on a smaller platform at national meetings. Write to the journal editors and offer your services being a journal reviewer. I talked about already applying for to get onto committees, and then the same for examination boards. Keep your eye out for these opportunities. We get a lot of emails about them, and you have to decide what you're interested in. You don't want to spread yourself too thin, but there's a lot of opportunities out there if you look for them. So let's move on to documenting this activity. It is really, really important. I can't emphasize this as much because I've been tortured with reviewing incomplete CVs for many people as my role of chair of our departmental promotions committee on keeping track of this in some form. You need to track, for example, all these things related to your educational efforts that you're not going to think about tracking. And I can assure you that you're going to forget it. If I asked you now what lectures you gave last year, you might remember them. If I asked you in 5 years what lectures you did last year, you're not going to remember. So you have to be able to track this. And there's different ways you can do it. And we'll talk about a couple in a moment. As I said before, for learner evaluations, you want to keep your learner evaluations from anything you've been involved with. But you also need to track the names of specific learners. Most institutions, including ours, which asks for 10, wants brief evaluations from your learners. And these can be ones that you've had mentoring relationships with, you've spent a significant time. Any teaching evaluations you've had, you want to keep them for your portfolio, but they will be contacted when you've given us their names to ask for these evaluations. So we ask for 10. Other institutions have a variable number. So how can you track all this stuff? Well, if you're a paper sort of a guy or a girl, you can certainly just throw it all into a folder in your file cabinet each time it comes, or an electronic folder on your computer. Make sure it's backed up now. If you want to do that. And that's certainly what I did for my first promotion or two. Every time I got something, I had a big folder called promotion. I tossed it in, I sorted it out several years down the road. In our department, you have the radiology scholarly and service activity here, and just put everything in there. It's really quick and easy to put it in as you go along. You can load up your teaching evaluations. You can see in that bottom link down there, and it's going to be there. You can download that as an Excel file at any point. Keep your CV up to date. I've had faculty who have taken longer to get their CV in appropriate format for us to be able to submit for their promotion than I think War and Peace took to write. As I said, you forget the stuff you've done if you don't get it down. So let's run through the process, at least as it relates to promotion at Geisel. Most other institutions are going to have a similar, if not identical, track. So we have a departmental promotions committee which reviews regularly all the potential candidates. We have annual reviews done by the vice chairs and the chair in the department, and this is also one of the things that we assess at that point. We advise the faculty as to their potential sort of suitability for promotion at what time interval. The promotions committee makes its recommendations to departmental chair, and it is the chair who will propose you as a candidate for promotion. Now, the responsibilities the chair has and the responsibilities that the candidate has. Let's start with the candidate responsibilities. So the candidate needs to get a couple of things together. They need to get their CV together, and they need to get a career statement or personal statement together. Not all institutions require this career statement. I find it extremely helpful when I'm doing an outside review letter when there is one, because it really fills in the gaps of the CV. And, as my role of the promotion committee chair, I review both of these and send them back for edits. You then need your teaching evaluations I talked about before. So these teaching evaluations will be from students, residents, fellows, mentees, etc. And we need quantitative data, we need verbal comments and evaluations, and then we need these formal 10 teaching evaluations. So we ask them for that, we sort that out, but we need the names. We need copies of publications, 4 to 10, and we need documentation of grant support. Most, but not all, institutions have a very specific format that the CV needs to be in. So before you start working in your CV, find out if your institution has a specific one. At Geisel, the link's below. It's all on the faculty section of the medical school website. There is a specific format. If you get your CV in this format from day one, it's going to be much easier to keep it up in that format than changing it. And I was like, from experience looking at a lot of other CVs, I actually have grown to really like, because it's really very comprehensive and easy to understand if it's completed properly. Just noted here, they do want things either in chronological order or reverse chronological order. It doesn't matter which, but don't mix them all up. This is not the CV that we want to have your home activities, your non-clinical activities in. Nobody cares when you're going up for promotion if you're a fabulous windsurfer or you volunteer or you're a fabulous cook and so on. So take all that stuff out. We do care, however, that this is edited, that the spelling is good, that there aren't obvious mistakes, and particularly that there are no gaps in the chronological order. You need to make sure that there are no time gaps in your career on this CV. My experience has been generally that people really underreport the things that they've done. They don't think that they're important, or they've just forgotten about them. As I said, at Geisel, you have to write a career statement, and this is a 1 to 3 page summary of what you've done in all the 4 areas we talked about: research, clinical, education, engagement. And particularly, what impact have you made? What impact have you made locally, regionally, and nationally in your career? And a little bit about what impact do you think you're planning to make? And this is really your opportunity to fill in the holes. And if you've got a somewhat more unusual CV, perhaps you are on a bit of a mummy track for a few years, this is your opportunity to just sort of briefly explain that. Here's the responsibilities of the chair. The chair identifies inside peer reviewers from your institution. These can be suggested by you, but the chair picks them, and they are, often clinicians from outside of your department who've worked with you. We at Geisel need 7 outside reviewers for full, 5 for associate. This is a lot of work to get these reviews. It's a lot of work to get them to write them. At our institution, you cannot pick all of those reviews yourself. The majority of them need to be picked by the chair, but you can suggest some of the names. You need to have letters of support from learners, as I said, and these need to be 10, and they can be selected by the candidate. And then the chair writes a letter that summates all of what you've done, all of the information that they've had come in your portfolio, and that goes with your promotional package. So your promotional package goes to the Promotions and Tenure Committee at Geisel. This meets monthly, September through June. It is reviewed by all members, but it's summated and presented by one of the members, and the chair of the department is present for questions. We then discuss this portfolio. We make a vote, and our vote is the recommendation that is made to the dean and the dean's advisory board. And then if they approve it, the final decision is conveyed to the candidate. In my experience, at least in my department, the process timeline is at least 6 months, and commonly 12 or even more. And the big delays seem to be in getting your CV in the Geisel format, in getting that career statement written, and then particularly in getting the outside reviews back, which can take some significant time. So what happens if the promotions committee recommends that you are not put forward for promotion at this time? Well, all is not lost. You can certainly resubmit. In fact, most people do resubmit. The committee gives specific feedback, and they do expect that to be addressed. So when you come back, they're going to look very particularly at their records in the last meeting to see if you address that. How long it takes is, can be months to years, depending on what needs addressing. If it's more than about a year, those reference letters may need updating, or you may need additional letters. I'm just going to circle back to the up and out question. As I said, this is not at Geisel for DH hires, but there are expectations in the academic medical system line. We expect that you're going to apply for promotion by your 6th year. We expect that you have contribution to the academic mission, whether it's in form of teaching or other types of scholarly activity, and that potential does exist for movement to a clinically prefixed line. Now, we had a totally rewritten promotions and tenure system come into effect summer of 2016. And this has put increased requirements on the academic faculty to apply for promotion, as I stated before. So the question is, are we grandfathered or grandmothered in if we've been at our institution for a long time? And I would have to say it's currently a little unclear. So who is going to mentor you in this process? Well, most of us have no single mentor in our academic lives. You may have a mentor for your educational component, one for research, one for administration, and so on. And this is fine. Develop the mentors that you need to get you to where you need to be, and obviously mentors that you can relate to. You probably need to seek these people out. You may be lucky enough to be in a department that has a very strong mentoring system, but many do not. Get your portfolio reviewed sooner rather than later, either by a member of the promotions committee within your department or within your medical school, or in our case, Leslie Henderson, who is the Dean of Faculty Affairs and who is the head of the APT committee, is always happy to review portfolios and give you some feedback. If you do this, however, I do recommend that you have your CV together before you do that. If nobody can review an incomplete CV and hope to fill in the gaps and give you useful advice. So in summary, there are significant benefits to promotion, both personal and professional. That scholarly activity includes research, clinical education, and engagement activities, some combination of the above. Most portfolios do not focus on any one of these areas. And that the process of portfolio development is very gradual, so think ahead. Think about something you can do now. Think about where your bandwidth is now. Maybe you can only take on one or two extra things, but even those are going to help contribute to your total portfolio in time. There really are multiple opportunities for scholarly activity, so network wherever you can, at your meetings, at your institution, and be alert for opportunities that interest you. But pick the ones that interest you because they're the ones that you're really going to contribute to the most. And then document all of your activity. Document it in an online database, in paper format, whichever way you decide. But keep your CV current. In our case, put it in the Geisel format, so put it in your institutional format as soon as you can. So just to remind you of the responsibilities. The responsibility of the promotion committee in your institution, in your department, is to mentor you and to review your portfolio. But it is the faculty's responsibility to develop portfolio and to document and edit your CV and your career statement and keep all that information I talked about. And then it's the chair and administration's responsibility to get your outside and inside reviews and to be able to collate your submission. I want to thank our Dean of Faculty Affairs, Leslie Henderson, for her guidance in developing this talk and also her stellar service, which is a really, really tough job as Dean of Faculty Affairs. And you don't get to ask me any questions because I'm not there, but you can email me, petra.lewis@hitchcock.org.